In a world where kingdoms rose and fell by the sword, there lived men whose power came from ink, hidden behind monastery walls. Far from battlefields and thrones, a different kind of warrior began his day. One whose weapon was a feather, and whose battlefield was silence. Brother Aldrich, a scribe, unknown to the world beyond his abbey, yet vital to the world's memory. Each morning began the same, a whispered prayer, a bowed head, and then the slow, reverent walk to the scriptorium. There, surrounded by scrolls, parchment, and silence, he took his seat on the same wooden stool as the day before. And the day before that, the tools were few. A quill trimmed by hand, ink brewed from oak galls, iron and vinegar, and vellum, prepared from the skin of calves, stretched, scraped, and smoothed until ready to bear words that would outlive empires. He didn't simply copy. Each word measured, each stroke deliberate, each letter a prayer in itself. Hours passed in silence. No clock to chime the hour. Only the slow movement of light across the stone floor marked the day. Brother Aldrich remained still, his posture upright, his breath steady, as if his very body obeyed the rhythm of the sacred words. Mistakes were costly. One blot of ink, one careless smear, and hours of work were lost. There was no delete, no second chance, only patience and penance. But there was beauty in the burden. In the margins of his manuscripts bloomed vines and beasts, saints and sons. Even though no one would know his name, he poured his soul into each curl of the letter. Outside, the world marched forward. Merchants shouted, knights trained, plague spread. But inside these walls, Aldrich wrote, as if time stood still, preserving prayers, copying laws, binding memory to skin with every line. His hands ached, his back stiffened, but Aldrich did not pause. His task was sacred, a bridge between generations. What he transcribed today would be read by eyes not yet born. He was a servant of the eternal, a guardian of memory. Every book he touched was a conversation across time, one scribe's voice reaching through the centuries to meet another. And though he spoke little, his thoughts were full of God, of duty, of the world beyond the abbey walls, a world he would never see. The ink must not run, the parchment must not wrinkle. Aldrich's focus was unshakable. These weren't just words, they were echoes of faith, law, love, preserved in silence. By a man the world would never know. By nightfall, the day's labor was complete. A single page, perhaps not much by modern measure, but each one a work of devotion. His hands were stained with ink, his robe worn at the elbows. Yet there was no pride, only purpose. He had once sat beside another scribe, eyes wide, heart uncertain, learning to sharpen quills, treat balance lines with precision, to breathe steadily through long hours. Now, years later, the roles had reversed, and Aldrich, too, would one day pass his craft to a younger hand. The scribe's legacy was not a name etched in stone, but letters inked in silence, passed hand to hand, century to century. Each completed book was not just a record, it was a monument to memory, to meaning, to the unseen hand behind history. Each of these volumes held more than ink. They held breath, memory, soul, words carefully chosen, carefully preserved. Aldrich remembered each one, where he sat when he began it, what season it was when he finished. The world outside had changed. Rulers had died, wars had come and gone. But these words remained. He had never fought in battle. He had never stood before a king, but his work had passed through both, carried by hands he would never touch. To be a scribe was to vanish into the margins, yet leave behind something eternal, a quiet defiance against forgetting. Even now, after all these years, his hand did not tremble. His ink did not falter. The story continued. The years had slowed him. His hands were no longer swift, but they were steady, trained by decades of repetition and reverence. Each time he began a new book, he paused, not from doubt, but from respect. To write was to witness, to shape a future he would never see. Few in the world knew where their laws were copied, where their prayers were preserved, where their names were recorded into the fabric of time. The world moved fast, but within these stone walls, time bowed to the scribe. His fingers remembered the shapes before his mind could summon them. Like a musician playing a hymn learned long ago, there was grace in that motion. There was faith in every line. Though no one cheered, no one applauded, Aldrich knew each word mattered. With each closing of a book, a part of him was sealed within it. Not just ink and parchment, but patience, devotion, time. There were no signatures, no marks of authorship. The scribe did not write to be remembered. Now, a new hand would learn, a new voice would join the lineage. The sacred rhythm would continue. Aldrich had once been that novice, eager, unsure, wide-eyed at the enormity of the task. And now, he was the quiet mentor in the corner, whose presence said more than words ever could. In the stillness of the scriptorium, legacy was not spoken. It was practiced, page by page, line by line. The years had taken much. His strength, his speed, even the surety of his sight, but not his devotion. He had long since stopped counting the pages. They were no longer tasks. They were testaments. Each line he wrote was a quiet defiance against the forgetting that time demands of us all. There was no crowd to applaud his work, no legacy carved in marble, but he knew what he preserved would outlive him, like the passing of a torch or the turning of a page. This was how time moved for a scribe, not in hours or years, but in finished folios, in bound volumes, in silence made sacred by memory. And so, as the night deepened and the world outside faded into frost and stillness, Aldrich wrote on, not for glory, not for reward, but for the future. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when Aldrich allowed himself to pause, not from exhaustion, but reflection. What he transcribed was not merely ink on skin, but the breath of civilizations, from Roman philosopher to Hebrew prophets, the poets whose names had long since faded from the lips of men, all lived again through his quill. It was here, between margins and margins, that Aldrich felt closest to God, not in chants nor sermons, but in the careful curve of a letter, the quiet patience of a perfect line. The boy did not speak. He knew now that silence was sacred, but he saw in Aldrich's eyes the weight and wonder of a man who had lived not through war or conquest, but through pages. And so began a new page, not just of parchment, but of a lineage passed on not through blood, but ink. Time moved differently in the scriptorium. Hours folded into one another, measured not by clocks, but by lines completed. The apprentice's hand no longer trembled, not because he'd mastered the craft, but because he had come to trust the stillness. Aldrich, too, had a final labor ahead. One last great work, a gospel bound for the city, carried by a horse across mountains and rivers, to rest on marble and gold. He would not see where his words would go, but he knew they would endure. Ink, laid by a steady hand, was mightier than swords or kings. Aldrich did not speak often, but when he did, the boy listened as if God himself whispered, "The word is eternal, but it is the hand that gives it form." Thus, the cycle continued, one letter at a time, one soul awakened through silence and ink. The rain came often in spring, it softened the world outside. But within the scriptorium, there was only the firmness of the quill and the ever-steady beat of purpose. He had traced hundreds of pages like this, each stroke a prayer, each margin a quiet sanctuary. And yet, this one felt different. His past whispered back to him through lines written decades ago. The tilt of the letters, The slight flourish at the tail of age revealed the man he once was. Eager, uncertain, devout. The storm stirred a question he rarely allowed to surface. Had all this labor been seen? But the answer was not in recognition, nor in praise. It lived in the quiet unfolding of the word, in far-off places, in hearts he would never know. The scribe wrote, not for glory, but for the page to live. And as long as parchment endured, so too would he. Each day began the same, but within that sameness, 1,000 variations bloomed. He had learned to read the skin, like a shepherd knows his flock, like a vintner knows the vine. There was order here, a divine geometry, each line not merely space, but an invitation. He no longer needed an abbot's voice to tell him this work was sacred. The proof lay in the silence between pen strokes, in the pages that bore witness without ever speaking. Master Aldrich, I have them. Good. We shall steep them before the bells. And the boy watched not just how the ink was made or how the letters flowed, but how a life could be lived in devotion, one page at a time. Beginnings were never truly beginnings. There were continuations. Threads woven into a larger tapestry, and Aldrich's thread, though small, would hold strong. As the hours turned, so did the pages. Each syllable of scripture, each gilded initial, was a quiet act of resistance against chaos, against time. Ink and pigment were not merely tools. They were alchemy. An Aldrich, a conjurer of clarity in an age shrouded by shadows. Brother Old, this came from the Western Chapel, is falling apart. Every book suffers the fate of flesh, but not its soul. He was more than a scribe. He was a healer of memory, a keeper of voices that would otherwise fall silent. The world outside moved faster. Kings rose and fell. Wars kindled and died. But within these walls, time obeyed parchment and pen. Aldrich did not write to be remembered, he wrote, sir. Others would not be forgotten. Night had long since wrapped the world in silence. But Aldrich's quill danced on, not out of duty, but devotion. With every stroke, he was not only copying scripture, he was resurrecting hope, symbol by symbol, line by line. Letters are like prayers, each one sent forward into an uncertain world. He would never know who would read his work, never hear the voice of a young monk or the distant scholar whose spirit might be steadied by these very pages. Brother Aldrich, come, eat something. Even truth needs rest, a life so quiet that even its moments of rest felt sacred. And in that stillness, he found the greatest script of all, peace. A new day begins, not with bells, but with breath and parchment. Brother Aldrich, may I sit beside you today? Of course. The margin is wide enough for both ink and learning in the hush between candle and sun. Wisdom flowed not through sermons, but through shared silence. It looks like it's alive. If it lives in your memory, then I've done my work. He had no children of his own, but he fathered knowledge, raised it with ink-stained hands, passed it on, one letter at a time. The unseen life had never been so luminous. The work never ended, but in the repetition of it, a quiet peace emerged. Each letter shaped by hands, aged in devotion. Each word a testament to unseen perseverance. Each manuscript, bound and sealed, carried a fragment of him, not in name, but in every inked stroke. Each page he'd folded with reverence. The boy watched, not to learn how to hold a quill, but to understand the weight of what it meant to preserve a thought for eternity. There had been another scribe, long ago, whose hands had guided Aldrich's. Aldrich's hands would guide this new generation in the eternal cycle of ink and parchment. Each scribe was both student and teacher, the craft passed on, a quiet flame in the dark. The world outside was vibrant, fleeting, but within the scriptorium, there was only stillness. A time of quiet labor where the world slowed down, and all that mattered was the page before him. Master Aldrich, what do we write today? Today, we write what is forgotten, and in doing so, we remember. In the quiet labor of their hands, the unseen life continued, silent but eternal. As rain kissed the ancient earth, beyond the abbey, within these walls, another kind of storm brewed. One not of chaos, but of quiet revelation. What does it say, Master Alt? The shapes are strange to me. It speaks of the stars and the music they make, even in lands far from here. Men have searched for meaning in silence. For the first time, the boy realized to be a scribe was not merely to copy, but to listen, to interpret, to translate souls across time. How many before him had sat at this same bench, hands trembling over ink, eyes straining under lamplight? Each one a vessel, a bridge between the dead and the unborn. They're still speaking, yes, and we are their echo. The hours moved with gentle rhythm, and in that rhythm, the scribes found sanctuary, a life measured not in days, but in words preserved through ink and silence. The unseen life of the scribes stretched ever onward, not for glory, but for memory, and for those yet to read. In the deep hours of the night, when the world slips into silence, the scribe remains awake, not by duty, but by devotion. By candlelight, he carves eternity, one delicate stroke at a time. Each letter a prayer, each flourish a hymn. Master Aldrich, you haven't rested. The saints did not rest when the soul was at work, nor shall I. It's beautiful, like something living. That's because it is. A letter carries more than a sound. It carries the breath of memory, soul past the hours. Two souls wrapped in ink, bound not by blood, but by parchment and purpose. How fragile their world was. One gust, one careless hand, and centuries of thought could vanish. Protect the flame, both this one and the one within. For in the stillness of ink and night, the scribe guards not only books, but the soul of an age. As the world stirs awake, the keepers of its memories sleep. Not from weariness, but from peace in this cloistered world. Love speaks, not in words, but in gestures as quiet as breath. You must have surrendered to the ink, or to the silence. Maybe both, Master. It is complete, not perfect, never perfect, but honest. And in that honesty lay a mirror of the world. Imperfect, yes, but illuminated by care. We'll bind it next week. For now, it must rest. One page ends, but the book remains open, waiting for the next breath, the next hand, the next flame. Why do we not sign our names? Because the work is not ours. We are vessels, nothing more. In an age of parchment and silence, anonymity was devotion. The eagle was trimmed, like the quill sharpened, but never shown. You have honored the word with beauty and patience. The glory belongs to the ink and to the hands that guided mine. The names were never recorded, but their prayers lived in every margin, their quiet labor. Eternal, your turn will come. One day, your hand will carry the silence forward. This is how memory survives, not shouted into history, but whispered across centuries. One line at a time. Time passes differently here, measured not in hours, but in lines completed, pages turned, and prayers whispered between strokes. Perfection is the pursuit, not the promise, because mercy lies in mending, even in our flaws. There is purpose. The journey of a scribe was not one of fame or fortune. It was a devotion sculpted by repetition, an apprenticeship to silence. Mistakes are not the end. They are where learning begins. In each hand that took up the pen, the tradition breathed anew. The pen may rest, but the mind does not. The scribe's thoughts ink themselves into silence, even long after the vellum is laid aside. When we write for others, we sometimes forget to write for ourselves. That's why the abbot requests your presence in the library. Of course, even the night makes room for duty. You've been faithful, Aldrich, beyond what was asked, beyond what was seen. The work was its own reward. Father, Still, it is time for you to pass the torch. Our new novices need your eye, your steadiness. So many pages still unwritten. Then help guide the hands that will write them. A new chapter was opening, not in a manuscript but in the soul of the man who had written for a lifetime. He had once sat where they now sit. A boy with ink-stained fingers and a mind hungry for meaning. Mistakes are part of the manuscript. Even the finest codices carry ghosts of hesitation. I'm sorry, Master, I'll start over. No. Look closer. There beneath the error's effort, let the page breathe with honesty. Your illumination sings, Helena, but don't let beauty silence clarity. The word must be seen before it is admired. Now, he no longer wrote only with ink, but with guidance, with encouragement, with every nod, every correction, every shared glance of understanding. The torch had passed, but the fire was still his. The hours had turned to years. Ink into memory, parchment into prayer. Et inquietum est cor nostrum donec requiescat. It was more than a manuscript. It was the echo of his life, bound not just in leather, but in devotion, silence, and soul. In a world loud with war and kings, his was a quieter triumph. Letters carefully hidden, truths faithfully preserved. Not every book found its way to kings. Not every hand that wrote them was remembered. But within these walls, their labors endured, hidden, protected, waiting for eyes, yet unborn. May it speak beyond me. History does not remember every voice, but in ink, in vellum, in quiet rooms of devotion. Some voices never truly fade. In the unseen life of a scribe, the visible world was copied, but the eternal was inscribed. Years passed, ink faded parchments. Yet the world outside, the monasteries shifted, kings rose and fell, cities bloomed, languages changed. But here, the silence remained, and so did the words. Scribe Aldricus. Aldric never sought glory. He never led armies or sat upon a throne. But he gave the world something greater, a trace of truth, written in quiet devotion. Who was Aldric? A scribe from a very long time ago. His name survived because his words did. In every book copied, in every prayer preserved, in every line that bridged the ages, there lived the unseen hand of a man who wrote so the world would not forget.